Scary beast. All right, welcome. Today we are studying again another WGU course. We are doing WGU's D080. We're doing managing in global business environment. So core competencies we're covering today is globalization, legal and ethical considerations, business strategies, global business practices, and technologies and trends. So right now I'm just working through another one of the pre-assessments and just practicing and working through different problem sets. I have my ChatGPT Copilot set up on the side here. I've set up study mode. So what we're doing is just working through and practicing various questions. And so that's what we're working on. So, all right, question 14. What was the economic impact of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA? A, the overall loss of jobs and higher unemployment. B, the increase of low-skilled worker unemployment in the United States. C, the reduction of economic output as measured by gross domestic product, GDP. And D, the shift of jobs away from low comparative advantage industries. So the way I think about that is okay, you have this trade agreement. What was the overall impact? It's not really stating what the overall impact is, good or bad. It's just asking for some kind of impact. So overall job loss and higher unemployment probably didn't happen. There might have been at the time job loss in manufacturing jobs, but overall I think there was probably a net increase or like a shift, like freed up like once. So typically, okay, so think of this like a simple math problem. Okay, so internally you're handling all your manufacturing and you're doing it there and you have only so much labor capacity, right? Your organism, your body can only do so much work. Okay, so now with this trade agreement, now we're saying, hey, can you do this for us, right? And we'll pay you for this. So now we've offloaded that work, right? So that frees up your capacity. Okay, so your net overall is increasing. So once these people kind of skill up over time, typically with that expansion, there was actually there might have been an initial reaction of okay, here goes the job loss, but then that vacuum fills it and new things populate and fill that void. So the entities and the organisms inside each other find a way to skill up and continue to work, otherwise it dies off. Okay, so overall job loss and higher unemployment probably happened for a very, very short period of time, but then probably increased overall between having jobs sourced overseas and in seas. The overall net would have increased. The increase of low-skilled worker unemployment in the United States, so kind of the same thing. So low-skilled worker would have had a moderate increase, but historically I think we look at the thing like if you zoom in, there would have been an increase of just in the United States, briefly probably, but over a duration of time. Over the long run, the small dip would have actually been very shallow versus the incline of lower unemployment overall when you zoom out between the two countries. The reduction of economic output as a measure of gross domestic product. So when when you are bringing two entities that are typically operating separately and now you have them cooperating, they're an additive output. So them manufacturing and you manufacturing both collectively is an additive metric. So even though you might have taken a few jobs here, transplanted over there, they master whatever product, they bring it over and there's free trade in each other. You're now the same entity. So overall you're growing. So no, there's not a reduction of economic output between the two. It actually balances out and increases. So there would be a shift of jobs away from low comparative advantage industries. Yes, there would have been a shift away. What that means is essentially the industries, the bottom feeder industries of the economy of the organism. Think of this like the ocean sometimes. So you have all these entities vying for collect like small resources. Okay, so you have cellular organisms kind of grouping together to larger cellular organisms. Think of like a difference between a whale and a simple tuna or something like that. So two big fish, but difference in scale, right? So with trade agreements, you are essentially growing and expanding and bringing in resources in, right? Even though you're operating with another country, you are collectively coming to a negotiation where you're at combative resources. Now you're bringing into their team. So overall, the first initial function is the bottom feeders within internally get kind of flaked off and would go somewhere else to survive and be viable still. So there would be a shift. So that's my kind of reasoning for that question. So I'm going with D, shift of jobs away from low comparative advantage industries. So as you're expanding, there's going to be upper comparative industries and there's going to be low comparative advantaged industries. And what this is stating is like as everyone's competing and trying to vie for survival and resources, the ones that are on the bottom of the chain are just going to shift and pivot the quickest and earliest. I love this sentence, this kind of explanation. So right here, if anyone's watching, is when countries enter free trade agreements, the short-term dislocation, job loss in some sectors is offset by long-term efficiency gains. So best example I can give of this is going to this kind of the stock market. Let's go look at the S&P 500 index. Okay. Let's go to Google. Stocks. I want to see stock trading today. Yahoo Finance. Here we go. SPY. All right. So if you look at the day or 5 day, let's go month. Okay. Here's a perfect example. Okay. So this red line right here is the start of day ticker. Okay. For the day. Where the stock price started. Okay. And what it's telling you up here is it's plus 870 right now, up 0.134% overall from the start of day. Okay, so here's the duration of time. So since 6 o'clock this morning, Pacific time, I don't know when the stock market opens on the East Coast, but I think 9 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. It's up $8. Okay. And so it's going to be green or red depending on the start of day. So it'll go down or up. It'll end there. Okay. So these are 1 and 5 day. These are short-term trends. So here's again where we're ending at, where the price is currently at. Here's the start. And from this, it is down a collective of negative 1.344% in price. Okay. So short-term loss. 5 days at a loss. So if you were trading this at 5 days, you started on a Monday, you held it till Friday, you'd be at a loss of whatever that price is. But if you look at a month, it's still up 0.69. Long term, let's look at 1 year or 5 years. Better is 5 years. Okay, so that example, when countries enter free trade agreements, short-term dislocation. Okay. So its short-term dislocation is two bodies, cellular bodies, okay? You have a cell organism over here, you have a cellular organism over here. These are countries in this example, okay? You were taking a piece of it. Hey, I manufacture this good X, okay, and shoes. I don't want to do it anymore. You can do it cheaper over here. Just ship them back, okay? It is no longer cost efficient for me to do it over here. So I'm going to remove this entity and put it over here, okay? So they increase their manufacturing capacity. They get a limb, okay? And we lose a limb. Net still stays the same, okay? We are taking off. What happens over here? Essentially, this digit over here now has to, whoever is attached to that, the people working, the economic resources that were allocated, the economic resources now went over here, okay? But the people, if they were now geographically displaced, the ones living here, if they didn't move over here for cheaper viable, okay, now they're scrambling. They're now trading up. So there's a loss initially, but eventually, like a limb, it kind of grows back, okay? Resources come back eventually, okay? So they manufacture it, and over time, it comes back. And so what happens is these people, they didn't just die overnight. Most will figure out and problem solve and find a way to be life-sustaining and viable. So in a short-term trend, right here, here's literally a month of time in this stock market. There was a steep down, right? But if you look at the overall 5-year trend, it is up massively. So no major recent downward tick has really affected. It is still, all in all, still up over a long term. Okay, so that's kind of how these problems are looked at in the geopolitics of the world. It's, yes, there will be a short-term loss, but over time it kind of works its way back. Okay, so you can see a short-term loss like this if you zoomed in, but long-term this becomes a very, very small deviation, tiny fractional deviation over overall when collected to the long-term trend. So this is the best kind of example of how that's kind of worked out. All right, let's go to 5. A country has a characteristic traditional economic system with a poor infrastructure and limited economic opportunity. What is the impact of this system on the process of globalization? A country has a characteristic traditional economic system with poor infrastructure and limited economic opportunity. I have no idea what that means. What is the impact of globalization? So they have economy is traditional, so who knows what that means? We'll keep it in mind. Poor infrastructure and limited economic opportunity. So honestly, I think this is a situation to be taken advantage of and honest, but I'm not quite sure where the questions are going to go. If you have a poor infrastructure, typically someone's superior. Again, this is like dog eat dog world, okay? So survival of the fittest, right? Everyone in the ocean gets eaten by someone else, okay? So if you have poor infrastructure, you have a poor strength trying to vie in the survival ecosystem, right? So, and limited economic opportunity. So you have limited resources. You're living out in the desert and you're slowly withering away of starvation. Okay, so now when someone comes through and they have a caravan of supplies, you are kind of set up to be taken advantage of, but we'll see. Typically, if they were polite, they would allow you to glom on, and you can increase your overall net health, right? But you become part of them. They're in the superior setup. So let's see what the answers are. A, the globalization process is at a disadvantage as the country has the lower standard of living. The globalization process is at a disadvantage as the country has a lower. No, globalization would be a advantage for this guy. Globalization process has a shortcoming as there are conflicts with other countries. I'm not sure about that one. C, globalization process is unaffected as the system does not hinder the process. Okay. And D, the globalization process is steady as the country is not vulnerable to the impact of globalization. The globalization process is either disadvantage, shortcoming, unaffected, or steady. I would say C, the globalization process is not individually impacted by any one entity. It's just a process. It's a process of nations interconnecting and societally trading amongst each other. The reason I use the organism metaphor is like a cellular organism. There's a border, and then there's the entity itself trying to vie and survive. And so they can, at the borders, they're typically conflicting. They have their resources and they have the other resources, right? And so one is typically trying to overtake the other's natural. It's the nature of survival. So you're trying to take in other people's resources or other living things' resources. Okay, so the globalization is unaffected, really, but depending on how this guy wants to operate, poor infrastructure and limited economic opportunity, if they have people, they can utilize something. If they have resources, there may be something there. I don't know. This question's weird. I would say maybe D makes the most sense to me, but ChatGPT, let me know. All right, it is saying the traditional economic system, agriculture, barter based. Okay. Little tech, weak infrastructure. Okay. So, okay. Okay, so you're saying it's at a disadvantage in the overall process. So, the what you're stating here is traditional economic system. So, we can think air quotes agriculture based, agricultural society, less tech, kind of behind the more modern trends. So the more modernized countries, the more, what's the word? In warfare, the same kind of competition. In a free trade, free competition, life sustaining environmental system, the organisms are all trying to compete to the upper tiers. So the strongest survive. The one with the biggest stick. The technologically, societally, whatever intellectual, whatever nuanced edge can be viable in the new competitions, everyone chases suit. So the newest, most superior, the more modernized, technologically advanced countries in this case, in this situation of this context, kind of become the first cooperating entities. Either they're the first competitors or the first ones to kind of glom and start working together in this situation. If you're the one left behind, when people circle back, they can take advantage of you. Is that kind of what the lining of what we're thinking of? So they are at disadvantage as they have a lower standard of living. And so if there's limited seen economic opportunity within their own country, they may get passed up on if the other countries don't see that there's viable goods for them. Hi.
When you have a stopping point, like a naturally flowing stopping point, can you come to me really quick?
Sure.
Just when, not now, when you have a natural stopping point.
Yeah, I'm almost done with this question.
Okay.
Another great metaphor is a lot of times resource and economic or labor, let's call it energy. Labor is energy, economic capital is energy, technology is all energy. Kind of focus and intelligent is all another form of energy. So these are all different forms, but they all kind of commingle in an economic system. Okay, so you can think of it like I have my body, the capital flow, the liquidity that's moving in the body can be considered the blood, the thing that nourishes or carries nourishment to all the organisms and cells in my body. Okay, so my skin would be my border of this sovereign entity. My brain would be the hierarchical kind of decision-making network, okay, that guides us, and they all interconnect. Then I have different groups of organisms within my economy. So my lungs, my heart, they all do different functions. I have my nervous system, my digestive system. And they all commingle and cooperate. And within it is the blood. Okay, so let's say I get a cold, or I'm out in the cold. Let's say I'm in the freezing cold. Naturally, what's going to happen when I'm exposed to extreme temperatures or extreme conditions is my body is naturally going to choose where its prized resources go. So heart, brain, lungs, major tissues inside my chest cavity take priority in that. And extremities usually take the hit. So my fingers, toes, and stuff like that. So in extreme cold, people get frostbite, and so they lose nose, ears, appendages, and things like that. Blood stops flowing, and eventually those appendages freeze and die off. Okay, so that's kind of how we can think of this whole process. This traditional economy has poor infrastructure and limited resources, so they're withering away and dying. And so as globalization process is happening, they are at a disadvantage because they are tertiary priority to the overall entity. So as globalization happens, they've seemed to have been passed off. This is kind of happening right now. A lot of people don't talk about the birth rates and the birth rate changes along nations. Right now, the U.S. is having a pretty good, not importing, but a lot of people are coming to the United States to immigrate and stuff like that, while other countries are losing their demographic populations are slowly shrinking and withering away. So right now, the U.S. and geopolitics is focusing on making it seem like it's a big problem for migration, and it is in the sense, but over the long term stuff, we're going to see economies slowly wither away as the population decline kind of starts hurting other nations and other entities. So those will wither away as people and resources slowly, unseen, kind of in the shadows, starts migrating away. So like the first thing is it's just like the blood resource. It's like it doesn't happen fast. It can happen fast, but it happens slow, right? And as resources start getting pumped to it, it starts, those resources, the alive resources, migrate away and get pulled, and it slowly withers away. And then it gets overtaken by something else. It gets flaked away. Let's see. Oh, for globalization, usually it's a little bit of both. It's not individually. It's all the mechanics. So policy is typically the more open cultures will be more susceptible for this, but also the same, but also um, the policies and the cultures that have more sovereignty will attract typically. More restrictive countries tend to wither away first. I think in my analysis of everything, I'm not quite sure. I know this is kind of subjective, but I think you can kind of see it in technological and subtle economic situations. Like, I take more of like an overview of capitalism versus, like, let's say communism or something like that. So I don't look at it as like, I'm of this team or that team. I just look at it of what is the typical outcome. And I think one political structure kind of its hardest to survive, but I think it's just slowly withers away versus one economic structure kind of incentivizes that ability to self-sovereign. The more self-sovereignty, or the more ability to capture energy. So technology typically is a enhancer or magnifier of technology. Culture and cultural ethics helps bring people together, but then the policy allows people in the barrier to cooperate. So that's that interconnective agreement. The culture is what gravitates people to it. You need that culture to want to survive, and then technology helps magnify it. All right, I will be right back. I need to speak. I need to. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. All right. Question 18. What is the purpose? What is a purpose of a country implementing trade protectionism? A, to increase competition. B, to protect an infant industry. C, to protect against import subsidies. And D, to increase dumping. Purpose of implementing trade protectionism. My thinking is dumping. Not sure what they're meaning there, but my thinking of like just dumping junk on people. Maybe not. Not sure. To protect against import subsidies. Subsidies naturally happen, regardless. It's essentially. Well, subsidies is typically a handout, so that might be a benefit. When you're implementing protectionism, you're trying to protect yourself. So, protect an infant industry, yes, but typically when you're again protectionism, you're trying to at the bigger scale, you are trying to protect yourself. So I would go with A, to increase competition overall. So when you're trying to propose a country implementing trade protectionism, you're trying to make sure you have a fair chance at operating. So that's a increase in competition for yourself and everyone else. So that's what I'm going to go with is A. That's my thinking along that logic. Let's see what ChatGPT says. It says that's good reasoning. You're working it out step by step, but there's one subtle point to clarify about protectionism. Really does it? Really doesn't. What does in an economy? When government adopts trade protection, it's not trying to increase open competitions. It's actually trying to shield the domestic sector from foreign competition for a while. Think of it as putting a bubble around a younger or weaker industry. So okay, so infant. Okay, so it is. That's where the phrase "infant industry protects" come from. The idea is new industries need time to learn, scale, and reach efficiency. Okay, so like a herd of elephants protecting a younger infant. Okay, but the mechanism is temporarily shielding. Okay, so using the we've been using a lot of ecological metaphors here, biological metaphors here. So for protectionism, a nice little metaphor is natural, biological kind of protection. So parents protecting young. So protectionism is there's a new entity within our biological economy or ecosystem or societal, and while it's young and fragile, we want to protect it and nurture it while it grows. Like you said, that's a nice little metaphor to remember. Got it. All right. So I have a feeling we're going to use a lot of biological and ecological metaphors for global trade. I mean, it makes the most sense to like the way I always think of it. Um, I think of an economy typically as a its own ecological biological entity that's moving and flowing and finding and dispersing energy. So there's a lot of different metaphors you can use. Um, so like when currency comes into a economy, it's you can think of it like a kind of a food dropper into a bit of water. So you drop in the currency, and then naturally it has like the dilution effects, right? So all the different molecules, right? So you have a high concentrated drop or initial, and then it naturally through the current of the ecosystem that dye density will naturally disperse throughout the conglomerate of that liquid and stuff like that, depending on the energy level of it. If it's slow, it might take a while to disperse. If it's high, it can mix up very turbulently. So it all depends. So that's another way of thinking through things. I know not completely related to this question, but all right, let's jump to a new question. Question 11. How is special drawing right of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, valued? A, it is based on all members' currencies. B, it is based on the US dollar. C is based on the value of 5 most significant members' currencies. And D, it is based on the value of gold. The IMF I can't remember, but there's a bank that not the Fed Reserve. There's another bank over the Fed Reserve that a lot of people don't talk about, and I'm getting this mixed up with that specific acronym. I'm not sure what it stands for, but it might be this. It seems like it's the same thing. Don't quote me on this, but I know they handle a lot of currency denomination values and stuff like that, money printing and things like that. So, but let's break down this special drawing right of the International Monetary Fund. The special drawing right. How's the special drawing right of the valued? SDR. So typically, evaluations, when we're talking about evaluations of how things are valued, you're typically working from some baseline. So you have something of a measure of value. So when you measure anything, the foot is a fixed reference point. It doesn't really matter how long it is just a setting up a standard of measure. And so that's what kind of this question is how are we setting up a standard of measure? Currently, I believe in our fiat monetary system, everything is derived off of the value of the US dollar. Okay, it used to be based off of gold. All currencies were a standard measure of the kind of inherent economic value of gold. Okay. And then gold inherited the overall economic value of labor and resources and stuff like that. And so we issued currency capital on top of that. So that's historically how that worked, but I'm not sure how this one's fund. So I would say the US dollar, because that's currently how it's currently operating, but I don't know anything about this particular fund. Another one that would make sense would be it would be the overall value of multiple currencies. But I don't think that's how things are currently set up now. It would make sense to add in multiple currencies because most the other currencies would be derived on the economies of that sovereign nation, but I don't think that's how that's currently working right now. I think everything's derived to, I think, what's another metaphor I can use for this? Like free trade and capital economies are all chasing prices down to zero in a natural economy. That's the way it's supposed to work. It's that's not a bad thing, right? As technologies increase and we become more efficient, prices become cheaper for us because it becomes more efficient for us to produce. So naturally, as technology output increases, we're able to produce more at higher economic, energy efficient outputs. People always think to forget about this. Human labor plus machine labor plus energy labor and energy consumption, they all work intermingling. And so prices will always shoot down to the marginal cost of production, which is eventually zero. And so in this competition-based system, there's going to be one superior winner, and so there's always one unit of measure, right? So we don't typically use a grouping methodology. There's one superior measure. So in the United States, if I were to use this is going into a long-winded kind of thinking through this problem. Before this cut off, I was going on a kind of a thought process. So let's use the example of like measuring a distance. Okay, as everyone is setting up these examples of how to create a unit of measurement, there's going to be a basic competition as the technology gets set up. It's like, let's use this measurement, and let's use this measurement, and let's use this derivative or this unit of measure, and then eventually, once the competition goes, a standardization process is eventually worked through, and eventually, like in the United States, the weaker methodologies fail and die off, and then everyone starts gravitating across and standardizing it. So this is where we have a metric system or a kind of a standardization process. So in the United States, we measure distances on foot and inches or miles, not, meters, for instance, like in the European societies and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it is. It all eventually standardizes. So in this question, I would assume the same methodology would happen. So yes, there would be a process where multiple currencies are competing, but eventually it derives to one. So I think the best answer for this question would be the US dollar. Since we usually do not value things today's society in gold. Yes, gold is a massive thing in the economy that is highly valued, but is not how economic systems are derived and evaluated in today's society. We just derive it off of the dollar. let's input that and see what ChatGPT comes up with. So if you're a viewer and you're watching this is kind of like how I study. I focus on, it's called the encoding process. So I take my baseline of what I know, I take these tests, and I kind of work through with this specific tool. And instead of I don't memorize things. I don't care. I used to try to figure out memorization techniques. I used to try to study for these classes using memory palace fundamentals. And I just go to like very, very core, basic, simple, foundational stuff, which is actually learn the principles, but learn the principles off the test. So my study methodology is just go right to the quiz question, talk it through, rough talk it, get every extrapolated idea out, and then have this thing coach me back to basics and have it glom onto like little pieces, right? It doesn't have to change my methodology of thinking. It's just trying to make sure that I have an understanding of the methodology and the principles that it's asking. So that's all it's doing, is just breaking things down into simple understanding principles. So when I come to the test, I can just kind of pivot a little bit. I don't care for memorization of things or fundamentals or stuff. It's just like, all right, you have a understanding of this. Let's nudge it a little bit. So it's usually giving me coaching tips. That's a very thoughtful chain of reasoning. All right, so it is saying that I have a good understanding of it. So they went with the opposite. They didn't want a deliberate singular measure, and yes, I am right here. Standardizing is spot on, but they went with the basket, a basket of currencies. So that's the answer. Why do you think that would prefer a basket instead of the U.S. dollar as the base industry? Why with the basket is because of they want a more weighted form of measure. So you have each currency is going to have derived value of the economies that it transacts in, and then they can create a valuation that's a weighted measure of the whole kind of global scheme. So each currency has its amount of power into the system of how much capital force essentially is in it. So it doesn't derive everything to one singular. It derives into kind of a multi-body system. Question 22, the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, USMCA, a modification of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, broadened the scope of free trade between member nations and tightened restrictions in the region. Which regulation was established by this new agreement? A, almost half of all automobile parts must be made by a labor force that earns a minimum of $16 per hour by 2023. B, member countries may negotiate for foreign exporters to lower tariffs on their imports. C, all dairy products produced in Canada, Mexico, and the United States must be traded with no tariffs. And D, 100% of all automobile parts must be manufactured within the regions of Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Okay. That's a weird thing to work over. Okay, so you have this trade negotiation, broadening the scope between member nations and tightening restrictions in the region. Which regulation was established by this new agreement? I would say B. The reason is I don't think necessarily because it's talking about broadening the scope, okay? Not reading through the material and not knowing the history of this specific term agreement, I don't think it necessarily relates to just one singular import. So A, C, and D all focus on singular imports. D is focusing on automobiles or automobile parts. C is focusing on dairy products, and A is another part on automobile parts, and it's focusing on a minimum wage in a time frame. And I don't think the trade agreement would be distilled down to that level of granularity. I think the trade agreement would focus primarily on the taxes on how they commingle together. So the B is member countries may negotiate for foreign exporters to lower tariffs on their imports. And so that would be what the agreement, I think, would focus on. It's just that aspect of it, not the individual imports. Okay. So I was correct in my thinking, but historically, okay, so that's going to be tricky to remember. I don't think this assessment might throw me curveballs like this, because this seems to be more of like a history-related kind of assessment, less focusing on core fundamentals. So I may need a brief on some of the trade agreements that actually came up, of like what were the specific outcomes and reasonings for this, because I may need to have an understanding of the historical context of these agreements, because that seems to be the thing. So like my thinking on this, I was thinking through what would be the natural outcomes or the incentives of what these countries wanted, but I didn't realize that there was an actual specific clause of like, hey, actually this was part of the enforcement of this agreement, like you stated in the explanation that you just told me. No, we'll just keep kind of going over if I have issues. Kind of the same methodology. I want to use the same methodology I've been using, trying to work through these. But if there's something I miss, we'll try to work through that. It's okay because for these assessments, it's pass fail really, and so as long as I meet enough competency points throughout the assessment, it's okay to kind of miss little one-offs like this. Question 9. What is the current focus of the World Bank? A. Supporting structural development. B. Maintaining equity between developing countries. C. Improving quality of life. And D. Maximizing profitability. There's a lot of ways that one can go. A World Bank is going to focus on a lot of different things. Obviously, like working and making sure everyone's operating and trading fairly. But if a World Bank is going to be financing other things, they're going to be wanting to making sure that whenever you're financing, that is a profitable ROI. So everything's going to lead to that eventually. So everything's going to be tracking profitability. So I think it's D. Improving quality of life is a tertiary or like a kind of a extraction effect of maximizing for profitability. Same thing with maintaining equity. Like all these things are going to be, the bank is going to want to focus on making sure it can function and maximize on its profitability, and those other things will be secondary outcomes of that. Question 16. Country A and B participate in trade agreements that allow free trade among participant countries. However, country A imposed quotas on several import products to protect its domestic products. What is the effect, if any, of the domestic prices of these products? A increases, B can't be determined, C decreases, or D stays the same. Okay, so country A imposed a quota on a country B. Like I said, to protect its domestic products. So to work through the kind of the math problem on that one, the flood in of the imported goods from another country would essentially wash out the price, supply and demand. So if country A can't keep up with the supply output, or is just not happy with the amount in their economy, it is going to decrease price. Okay, so they imposed a quota on country B. Okay, not saying that anything bad about country B, but between the measure, there's domestic products being made in country A at a certain quantity, and there's a certain imported amount coming from B. So A plus B equals C, okay, and C is equal to the supply and demand of that country A, okay. What is the effect of any of the domestic prices? The domestic prices would fall in relation to the imported good because they're competing against each other. So what would be the effect of the quota? So it can be determined. What is the effect, if any, on the domestic prices of these products? The price would increase with the quota because, like I said, if you're restricting the amount of goods of the product that are overall there to buy, you're going to create a supply shock, which increases the prices. All right, let's jump to later questions in this exam. All right, question 70. All right, workers at a company are struggling to efficiently address daily problems because the company's current information system does not communicate across departments. What type of system should the company implement to solve this problem? A, deep learning system. B, integrated software system. C, management information system. Or D, enterprise resource planning system. Ooh, we got an interesting question. All right, so the primary problem is the company is not communicating across departments. Deep learning is a kind of algorithmic programming process that allows machines and code and databases to extract and kind of efficiently learn. But it's an internal system. So like right now I'm working with ChatGPT. That's a deep learning system, right? There's data sets that were trained into this model to create this particular system for useful outputs. Okay. This company doesn't have that problem. They have a communication link problem. So they need some kind of communication software. Okay, so an integrated software system would be kind of close. The terminology and what that is defining is kind of rough. A management information system could be useful, since it does have the keyword management and information system. So that's going to rely on the core functionings of that software and system is going to rely on communication networks, being able to send message traffic. Enterprise resource planning system. Again, this is another fancy, all these are fancy explanations of various kind of software functions. Enterprise resource planning system. Again, it's going to be kind of similar to, that's more of a database that is set up to track logistics and like I said, planning. So enterprise would be a big corporation. Resource would be like the capital, the assets, and all the different labor assets. And planning would be so essentially a CRM program. Okay, but this company I think would drastically benefit from a management information system. Integrated software is too vague in the way it's described. Cool. Got it. Question 62. A multinational company uses transfer pricing to reduce its tax burden on the subsidiaries' countries. Which effect does this action have on subsidiaries? A, relaxed regulation, B, reduced compliance, C, lowered profit, and D, increased morale. Uses transfer pricing to reduce its tax burden in the subsidiaries' countries. Okay, so this country is this company is focusing on itself. Which effect does this action have on subsidiaries? Well, if it's trying to lower its tax burden, the subsidiary companies are going to collect less in tax revenue. Okay, so an increased morale, probably not. I don't think morale is affected by this transfer pricing thing that's happening. Relaxed regulations, I don't think it's also affected. Reduced compliance, maybe speculative. I would say the most direct thing to answer would be lowered profits from the subsidiaries. Like I said, the company is looking to lower its tax burden, so that means in the subsidiaries countries. So less tax money is going to the other countries. That's going to be lower profits for the subsidiaries. Not necessarily lower profits, but lower tax income, which is tied to the imports. Give me a second. I'm reviewing one of my answers.
Okay.
I could pause it though. Let me see.
No, I can wait.
That's you explained things very well of how they all interconnect. The way I looked at it was, I'm not quite sure the transfer pricing, but the way it was explained in the kind of the context part of the question, it was transfer pricing to reduce its tax burden. Okay, so whatever it's doing, it's trying to reduce the tax burden. Okay, so the tax burden is essentially that company's amount of tax it pays out to people. And tax it pays out to people is essentially a separate revenue source that they're gaining. So in the importing process, you have the goods that are coming in. That's the asset that's now being brought into the nation. Okay, so that has its own value. And then the process of bringing that in, the nation typically imposes an extra tax on top of that. Okay, and that tax goes to the sovereign entity. Okay, so that's kind of how I brought that down. And so I broke down the subsidiary countries as the sovereign entity of the importing process. And so I looked at that as, okay, if this company is trying to lower its tax burden, it is collecting less money from them. It's pulling money away from them. And so they are losing out on profits in this whole process because one, less imports are coming in, possibly, but typically when you're focusing on just the tax, they're getting less of a tax as a revenue source for them. Is my line of thinking kind of correct in the formulation of this context and all this question? All right, guys, I'm back. All right. Yes. No one's watching. I just record it. What did you think I was doing? I am. Mostly. There's no one here. All right, question 59. A manufacturing company in the United States acquired a small national supplier based in California. Which accounting method should the company use to record the acquisition? A. International Finance Reporting Standards. B. Generally accepted accounting principles. C. Generally international accounting principles. And D. Financial accounting reporting standards. I would say C makes the most sense, but also B has the same thing. It's kind of the same thing, but D is a little bit more specific because it just interties the term international. But the company should be working its own generally accepted accounting principles. That's like kind of like the foundation of this whole context. Because this one's been global trade, I totally spaced out the fact that this was United States acquiring a small national supplier based in California. So it's like it's all internal. So United States to it's all internal. So yes, B is makes most sense. I forgot about the full context. I spaced out. Question 55. What is an advantage of using intermediaries in an indirect distribution channel? A. It maintains the company's interests at the forefront. B. It reduces upfront costs with the use of an existing channel. C. It displays a sense of ownership of the products. And D. It controls the marketing efforts. Let's see. All right, let's look at the question. Very simple. Advantage of using intermediaries in an indirect distribution channel. So indirect distribution channel for like logistics terms would be like instead of going from point A warehouse to point B house, it may go to point A to point C, D, E before going to B. What is the advantage of that? Well, in a logistics chain, typically, like let's say I ship something out, I sell on eBay, and I need to ship something to a customer. Okay, so it's not going to go directly from my house. A person, the mailman that comes to my house, isn't going to go directly to the next customer. It's not going to work that way. He's going to group my neighborhood together. He's going to pick up and drop off all the mail and then pick up all the outgoing. So he's going to give the ingoing to the houses and the outgoing from the houses. And he's going to take it to his one primary shop. And so he's going to have a central hub for him. And then that hub's going to have a secondary hub. So it might take it from, from a small town to a bigger town to a more centralized distribution hub. It's going to figure out where it needs to go within either in the state or out of state, and it's going to get it to a primary hub there, and then it's going to work into back to the customer. So it's going to take a little bit. So what that does is that allows logistics to move stuff more efficiently at a larger scale. Okay, so it's not one for one. The one mailman coming to my house and then going all the way to Florida. That'd be too inefficient. It's just more efficient for him to take care on the daily, the one little group of neighborhood residents, and then just drop all outgoing packages that are all 100 outgoing packages and take them to the hub, and then that 100 goes to another hub, and then it gets redistributed. Excuse me. So what's the advantage of using an intermediary in that sense? Again, it economizes the flow of all goods, not just the singular. So in this case, A maintains a company's interest in the forefront. Maybe it reduces upfront costs with the use of an existing channel. We can say that, yeah. It displays a sense of ownership of the product. Nah. And it controls the marketing efforts. I don't think so. I think C makes the most sense, using my logistics, mailing, the U.S. Postal Service kind of reference. Yeah, the reverse would be if it wanted more control, you want to do it more in-house. You have to spend more and brand it yourself. So if you want to use other people's network and efficiencies, you give up that control, give up that profit, give it up that share. It's more additive. I typically don't think of it as like giving up more control. You're gaining someone's energy at the same time. All right, I like that framework. All right, 43. We'll go back to yes, I would agree with you that in the simple testing terms, that would be kind of the standard principle. That's kind of not how this works in real life. Let's say I started a company, whatever you want, whatever it is. I can have full ownership of it. If this was a math problem, it would be 1 plus 1 would be me, the sole labor and owner of the whole business, right? 1, whatever amount of energy I can sum up as my own individual ability, right? 1 plus 0 would equal 1. Okay, but let's say I wanted a partner and expand the business. People think, oh, you're giving up equity, right? But 1 plus 1, when you look at a person's individual economic ability to specialize and you cooperate, 1 plus 1 equals 2. So you're actually magnifying typically, even though you are sharing the ownership wealth. You are scaling up, essentially. So that's really what's more realistic of what happens. But in simple testing terms, that's a great way to break it down and simplify it. Question 43. As a company enters a foreign market, it provides assets, takes on all the responsibility, and assumes significant risks. What is this market entry strategy? A, joint venture. B, exporting. C, greenfield venture. And D, franchising. All right, so let's work over each bit. A company enters a foreign market. It provides the assets, it takes on all the responsibility, and assumes significant risk. Okay, so he's entering. I think this is B, exporting. But let's go over the rest of the context of the answers. A is joint venture. My understanding of that is in let's say, a company or a corporation has some kind of revenue source it wants to go after. Let's break it down. Like, let's use the example like Elon Musk as a person, right? He has his trust that he owns under his brand and his entity. Okay, he owns Tesla, Twitter, which is now X, and SpaceX. Okay, so each one of those under him is a separate economic thing of what it is they're doing. SpaceX is focusing on engineering and space exploration, and Tesla is focusing on car manufacturing and battery engineering, and then Twitter was a gain of a asset for him to have a online business. I don't know what his overall goal was for it, but those are separate ventures. So that would be a joint venture. A greenfield venture, I'm not sure what that is. And then D, franchising. That's when the best example is a kind of restaurants. Restaurants are popular for this. I'm not sure which ones actually operate under this principle, but let's say I think Panda Express is a franchise. So you have Panda Express, the brand. They built up their business model in order to sell and grow as a business. Instead of building out all the restaurants independently, they're franchising. What the franchising is selling off a piece of the brand. They set it up like an umbrella. Okay, so people purchase the rights to use Panda Express, set up a store, get the food, get the recipes, get the setup of how the whole thing initiates. Now, a good portion of the profits goes to the owner, but it also is a profit share of to the franchising. So there's a purchase fee for building out and doing all the thing, and then plus for the investment, and then there's essentially a rental fee for using and operating and using the franchise name and brand that they've built up. So that's kind of that. But in this scenario, simple terms, exporting is just manufacturing something here, creating a good here, and sending it off. And so this company is entering a foreign market, provides assets, takes on all the responsibility, and assumes significant risk. Obviously, that whole process is the kind of the exporting process. They're coming into somewhere else, so he's bringing in, so exporting. Okay, so greenfield. Okay, go into a little bit more detail what a greenfield venture is. In basic terms, I get it. It's like when they're actually going the next step from exporting your manufacturer. You create the goods here, and you just ship it, right? And that good typically is wholesale purchased to the gaining shipping supplier, and then they have their partners and redistributions and reselling networks and however they want to do it. But it's like port to port transacting versus like okay, so that's that. So exporting would just be sending the goods. Greenfield is actually, okay, now we're going off one step further. We're going into a new country. We're planting the seeds. Nice. A silly little metaphor is when the Vikings started taking over England. And I don't know what year that was, but Vikings came from another country, and instead of raiding and then going back, eventually they got to the point where they saw England as a more resourceful land for them, and so they started kind of immigrating in and planting their seeds and staying and setting up permanent residence while still raiding and trying to take and capture land. So that's kind of a simplistic historical framework for that one. exporting, franchising, joint venture, greenfield. Greenfield is full, high risk, high control. Building the full thing in a foreign country. Joint venture is shared, Ford and Chinese automakers. Okay. Moderate risk, shared control. Licensing and franchising is moderate risk, moderate control because you're sharing and you're licensing in between it. So there's different negotiation terms. Exporting, you're just low risk, low control. You're sending stuff out and you're selling it over there, and they do whatever they want to. So, I mean, exporting could still be considered high risk, but in the overall scheme of instead of your end point of being to another foreign customer, like at a home or something, let's say we're importing pineapples, like pineapples made from Mexico. Farmers made it. They shipped it to the shipping distribution. Those are individual sales and transaction. Now the shipping distributor brings it here. They sell it to here. Now the port needs to sell it again to another distribution warehouse. And then they go, okay, these pineapples need to go to the Save Mart. And the Save Mart's like, okay, now these need to get sold to an end customer. So all those individualistic transactions through the chain, through the network of communications and how the thing got imported, it frees up the low risk for the farmer to get it sold here in the United States because he just sold it to the shipping supply company in his nation. And so that's why it's considered lower risk, because the shipping supply takes on the risk of getting it shipped here, and then they sell it to the importer port, and then they take on the risk of selling the good to the distribution networks, and they take on the risk of getting it actually sold out there to people that want to eat the food, essentially, or take on the imported good. Question 46. Which national cultural dimension refers to how agreeably a society accepts hierarchical differences between people in the global workplace? That is a mouthful of a simple one-line question. A, power distance. B, long-term orientation. C, masculinity. And D, uncertainty avoidance. Okay. A lot of terms here. Which national cultural dimension refers to how agreeably a society accepts hierarchical differences between people in the global workplace? I don't think it's masculinity. I don't think anything about masculinity refers to anything in that question. Same thing with uncertainty avoidance. I don't think that question is referring to anything. I would equate uncertainty avoidance as a person that is trying to project a future outcome and they can't, and they're fearful, so they're going to do the opposite. So they are highly uncertain, so they're going to pivot around something. So that's that. Now, B, long-term orientation. Again, that's like a forward projection terminology. I'm not quite sure I know what masculinity is, but the other, and then uncertainty avoidance, that's kind of can be broken down to. I don't know the specific definitions of power distance or long-term orientation, just breaking down the words that are used within the context of this specific question. Long-term orientation would be, in my thing of orientation is your focus or your alignment. to something. If I'm a ship out to sea, my orientation would be my vector or my azimuth of the route I'm going, so my compass heading. So your long-term orientation would be how long of you're staying on that fixed alignment. So for a company, this would be, if they have a goal, there's a lot of times they can pivot away from the goal. So this would be relating to like how, if this is your target, that would be your if it's your 10-year plan, that's your long-term orientation of where you're trying to get to. You can go these routes, but then you want to come back. So power distance, I think, makes the most sense here, because you're talking about a cultural phenomenon of agreeableness, of societal, and you add in the word hierarchical differences. So when there's hierarchical differences amongst people, you're talking about power struggles, and so power and distance is kind of the same. And so the global workplace adds in power, like power and control problems in a society. Question 50. An employee for a global technology company was assigned to the overseas office in Asia. Once the assignment was completed, the employee experienced disorientation in repatriating to the head office in the United States. What caused this orientation? A, loss of pay and benefits. B, changes in work culture and customs. C, lack of consistency in work dynamics. And D, changes in time zone between countries. All right, again, let's parse out what's going on in this question. What caused this disorientation? Once the assignment was completed, the employee experienced disorientation in repatriating to the head office in the United States. Based off the context provided, I don't think he took a loss in pay or benefits. It was a temporary assignment to Asia, so I think A is out of the question. B or D, changes in time zone between countries. The question doesn't really state like how long he was. He just says once he completed the assignment. So it doesn't talk about issues of traveling too much, too fast, or anything. Typically, time zone issues are caused by just the travel frequency. People can adjust pretty quickly when they are fixed in one location. There's a little bit of a jet lag for like, I've experienced like people get jet lag for like a couple days when they made the shift, but they bounce back pretty quick for long-term stays. So maybe it's the lack of consistency in the work dynamic, but because it's really trying to take an overhead look at global stuff, and like in this test tends to focus on global trade and differences. I think this question would be B, changes in work culture and customs. I just think that seems to be the trend for this kind of test. To kind of like pick question C, I would really have to need more context of like what's going on with this person in the job office to really want to pick that one. Just having a basic understanding what's going on, I lean more towards C because that one could be simply justified. This is kind of, I was in the military, and this is kind of what happened when I was spending time overseas. I went to boot camp, got kind of militarized, went to A school. I was in Chicago for like a year. I got used to that environment, visited, and it always felt like a little bit weird being around military people and then being home and then in a new state. So I grew up in California in the Central Valley. So being from Chicago to California was like a little bit of a culture, like a little bit of a re-culture shock after being immersed in boot camp and military culture for a while and training and like learning new skills in that shell shock of environment. And then a major one happened when I got permanently deployed to Bahrain. So it was like, oh, now you live in the Middle East. And it was like culture shock going there, staying there, getting used to it, getting used to the environment, the culture, the people, being in the military operations, our work, the whole thing. Did that for a year, come back, and all of a sudden be like, whoa, it feels odd here. I remember when I got picked up by my parents at the airport, I made the comment, people are actually following the traffic lights here and driving the speed limit. I remember in Bahrain, people would just swerve and cut lights and try to kill you all the time just because they didn't care. The traffic rules and stuff was a little chaotic and foreign. And the same thing once I got used to Spain too. Like I got used to the Middle East and I went to Spain and it was a little bit of a shock. Then I got used to that life, came here, and then there was a little bit of readjustment. So this is what this question is particularly talking about. How's your thing gone?
I think it's coming okay.
Pretty. This is gonna be so excited. She's gonna win Spirit Queen. What's she getting dressed up as? Ariel costume again? Alright. Exactly. That's precisely the lived version. Your experience both sides of the cultural down. Initial culture shock, reverse culture shock. Small ordinary areas that used to seem normal driving habits. Disconnect. Cool. That question makes sense to me because I've actually lived it. All right. Question 52. A computer technology company has several factories in 3 countries. The headquarters introduces steps in the manufacturing process so that waste decreases dramatically. Which supply chain practice is this company using to optimize production efficiency? For some reason, I love to read these super fast and have to go over it. Okay, the answer A, just in time. B, channel spanning performance measures. C, defining logistics networks. And D, lean manufacturing. Okay, so without going over the context of the question, because I need to make sure I encode everything, so when the questions that are very similar to these come up but are related to other things, I need to understand the core topics, because there's no math principles, so I have to kind of make sure I can parse and understand the rest of the terminologies in case I get other styles of question that are reverse correlated to this kind of question set. So just in time is referred to kind of the just in time manufacturing method. I can't remember when this was made, but this was like kind of specialized and perfected in like Japanese car manufacturing processes. So essentially they build all the car materials, they take in all the necessary materials into the manufacturing process, and then they somehow figured out the perfect schedule. So once a part that was just made from scratch arrives to the individual car, it needs to go to just in time. So it's not sitting in this process of bulk. So another way to define this is, let's say a light bulb, or the light of the car, the light, right? So the manufacturer of the light bulb may ship light bulbs here, but then the plastic, all the molding, all the other interconnected wiring pieces will get handled at the manufacturing plant. Okay, so that whole piece will get built and it'll just get assembled, and then it'll go to a small little batch, and then that small batch, instead of getting shipped to another manufacturing piece outside here, it stays literally in warehouse and probably has a very, very short shelf life. So I'm not saying that it doesn't have, like, these parts don't have a shelf life, but that that process of like, okay, it's now, light bulb has now been installed into the whole plastic shell. Now that whole plastic shell is going to go to a crate or a process of temporary storage, but then is going to essentially eventually end up on the car itself, and just in time. So it literally takes one part to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, piece to the just in time to bring it all to the car. Okay, so that's that. Channel spanning performance measures. Not sure what that is. To dissect the language, channel spanning performance measures is, you have, I'm thinking multi-channel, like communication network or logistics network or transaction network, doesn't matter. Channel is for computer sense, is a communication link. So point A, point B, there's a way of transferring data or transferring resources or value between two endpoints. That's a channel. And if you create multiples, that's a multi-channel. So if now you have a channel spanning performance measures, those are, I would think, the efficiency or different data extracted from the channel. So performance measures would be the data points from what's going on in the channel. The refined logistics network is kind of, think of like when I used the reference to the U.S. Postal Service. Okay, so a logistics process that spans multiple distribution hubs and warehouses that can span an area and has mass refined how it moves goods in between within the network. So from when a customer drops a product, the package to the web endpoint, it can move into the network and then out to another endpoint in a efficient process. That's a refined logistics network, I would say. Lean manufacturing would be a process of figuring out how to just optimize within your manufacturing capacity, of how to minimize waste. So going back to the question, that's one thing. The headquarters introduces steps in the manufacturing so that waste decreases drastically. So which supply chain practice is this company utilizing to optimize production efficiency? So it's happening in-house. It's not talking about how parts move from point A to point B and get into the manufacturing process at the right state and time. So that would be the key thing to think about for just in time. So this B and C are referred to. B is a analytical measuring process. C I would think of as just like a supply chain network of kind of clearly defining what it is. And then A and D actually talk about a manufacturing process. So this context doesn't refer to just in time, so I'm going to go with D. There's a great way to put it. Lean manufacturing. Waste means overproduction, idle time, unnecessary motion, excess inventory, defects, rework, underutilized talent. The focus is on continuous improvement, reducing the waste of both labor, material, and communication processes of the whole process. So in the question, it refers to headquarters introduces steps in the manufacturing process so that waste is decreased drastically. So this is the signature goal of Lean. Just in time. And yes, goal is to reduce inventory and storage costs. That was one thing I meant. I was thinking about and didn't bring in to the context. So yeah, just in time, reduced inventory costs and storage costs by aligning production exactly with demand. That's a perfect way of explaining that. I didn't quite explain it in that sense, but I had the right leaning of that material. The major breakthrough is that the piece is literally produced and it's brand new and it doesn't have any shelf life, essentially, I think is the term I used, and that's where you explained the reduced inventory and storage cost. Because if, like, let's say in the example I used with the light going into the car, if that shell of a light, let's say the manufacturing warehouse just built those lights, you would have to sell it to another manufacturer that actually built the car. Okay, so that would have a inventory, a logistics process of taking that light and going somewhere else, which can be a heavy cost if you're trying to save it. Now, for manufacturing process to take that on internally, in order to not have all these ports in bulk, you literally have to make them in time to go into the next step. So it just literally goes from one to the next, to the next, to the next. and it doesn't have any process aside from always just going to the next process to get built. And so just in time doesn't mean that it's not going to a storage spot. It's just going to go to a spot, and it's going to through a way of process of minimizing the storage and inventory costs. And I like the synchronizing the production flow. All right, question 38. A multinational corporation, MNC, with headquarters in the United States is seeking to limit its supply chain to U.S. companies so that decision-making authority is localized at the highest level of the organization. What is a result of using this decision-making structure? So a multinational corporation with headquarters seeking to limit its supply chain is localized at the highest level with A, economies of scope are decreased. B, there is increased consistency in operations. C, there is increased perception of fairness with suppliers. And D, economies of scale are achieved. Okay, so I'm not sure what to think about this question. You have a big multinational corporation with a headquarters, and it's seeking to limit the supply chain to the U.S. companies. So that authority is localized at the highest level of the organization. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about this question. This one doesn't make sense to me. Not that... To me, what I'm reading is like a corporation is trying to be heavy-handed in the way it's operating. So you have the shareholders of the corporation that over-authorize the U.S. element. So there is a headquarters in the United States, but they're seeking to limit the supply chain of the companies. So the authority is localized. It kind of makes sense to, it's trying to streamline this. It's trying to minimize the scale of what that piece of the multinational corporation does. So it may make things more efficient for it. But heavy top-down chain of command processes tend to overburden decision-making when it comes to a decision-making network overall. Heavy top-down. If it can roll bottom-up in a fluid communication network, it tends to optimize a little bit better. So I'm going to need a little bit of coaching on this one. Got it. Okay, so economies of scope and economies of scale come from producing actual products, like moving it. So this one specifically talked about decision making, and so B was the only one that actually held that. Like you said, C had to do with perception of fairness with suppliers. Fairness of suppliers is the suppliers are perceived to be external of this conglomerate. So there's no, like you stated, there's no mention of fairness or relationship. So the context of this is it's seeking to maintain control. So I guess the primary result is there's an increase in consistency in the operations. So because they can go top heavy, centralized control, it minimizes flexibility, but it standardizes everything at the same time. All right, question 27. Which convention provides gap fillers for terms that may not be expressly stated in agreement between two companies? A, Uniform Commercial Code. B, Common Law. C, Contracts for the International Scale of Goods. And D, International Treaties between the home countries of the company. Okay. I'm laughing at myself a little bit because I have to always multi-read these questions because, again, I come from like a reverse engineering my education process, so I'm always trying to piece together the terminology and the concepts. So it requires kind of multiple iterations. So when I read through this is another mouthful question of new terms and new parsings of words. So the key question is, which convention provides gap fillers for terms that may not expressly state in agreement between two companies? And between two companies, we can say two parties in a transaction. Which convention provides gap fillers in terms? So just in that, I would think okay, so we need to focus on the gap fillers. Okay, so A, Uniform Commercial Code. B, Common Law. Okay, so in the question, it just states two parties. Okay, so we can take out D because it has to deal with international treaties. And yeah, that could be beneficial, but it doesn't relate to this question. Same thing, contracts for the international scale of goods. I don't think it's related to this question because we're just talking about two companies. So there's no other context of how far or where these companies are. It's just the terms of agreement between two companies. Uniform Commercial Code. It can. I think the best one for this one is actually B, Common Law, because common law is kind of the underlying kind of social dynamic that has to do. It is actually a legal practice. I'm not quite sure the full scope of what it does, but I know common law has to do with kind of like the neighborly stuff, issues, or like neighborly disputes. So like for instance, like my neighbor, if I had an issue with like his tree or his dog or something like that, kind of falls into common law. So it's like the gap filler of communal interactions versus uniform commercial code that can, but I think that's a generalizing term, not knowing what that full term actually encapsulates. Cool. Okay. UCC. All right. So Uniform Commercial Code allows, it fills in is a special code that allows the gap filler frameworks. Question 67. Company is interested in working with the technology that will allow consumers to privately and securely store personal information such as social security and credit card numbers, making it accessible around the world. Which piece of technology is of interest to this company? Well, just based off of what I just read, a standard kind of secure database structure would work just fine, but I don't think they're going to go that way in this kind of class. So A is blockchain, B is artificial intelligence, C is virtual reality, and D is antivirus software. So I'm laughing right now. All right. Which piece of technology is of interest to this company? All right. So just out of those options to what their end goal is, artificial intelligence would be out, because the nature of how it's currently built. AI protocols and infrastructures are built on like massive GPU hardware and like pre-trained, like learned algorithms. So that's given data and it's extracted learning and education from it. So it's not a way of necessarily storing information. It is like a way of extrapolating lessons learned and knowledge from a data set of a entity. So I think of like AI as like its own educational ability that's extracted. That's why we refer to things as like who utilize these tools a lot as like various models are like, we think of them as like creatures, like humans. They all have their individualized skill sets because they have a knowledge base and a thing that they do with their mind of how they interact with us. So there's not really a way to store information, credit card information, security cards. antivirus software specifically designed to create firmwares for protecting databases. It's not really related to actually how it's stored. I think this one is focusing on working with a technology that will allow customers to privately secure. So antivirus software is a way of just securing your own computer or a data set. So the data is already on the device. It's just a process of filtering out inputs from external. Virtual reality is the VR world. That's a totally different thing. So 3 of those are completely different side things. So blockchain, I guess, can work. It's the only technology that it's the only technology you can store things on here. I would not put that information on a blockchain because depending on the build out, it's typically a public ledger, but it's typically in a digitized and cryptographically secured process, so it can secure it. But yeah, a blockchain would you allow it to do that? But a standard database today would operate just fine to do that as well. Are we taking 2 carts to pick up the girls?
Can you just take care of it? I'm still doing this.
Okay, so you want me to take the girls to dance?
Yes, please. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I was thinking through this question. I was like, we've been doing this forever now. Why are you asking about like these new buzzwords? cool. It all that makes sense. All right. C, or question 8. Which institution helps to maintain availability of global financing to solve trade deficit issues? A, International Finance Corporation. B, International Monetary Fund. C, the World Bank. And D, the Federal Reserve. Good question. On paper, I think that would be C. Because in other contexts, the International Monetary Fund is a kind of collection of the 5 major currencies. So, and that's how they evaluate something. I'm not quite sure what they do with that. The Federal Reserve handles internally for the U.S. its own essentially currency or asset distribution. So it is the point that issues the currency into the economy for the U.S. By doing various things. They have just literally 2 levers they can pull. They can change interest rates, whether up or down. They have a special term for that. And the interest rates between bank-to-bank lending. So anyone that's coming to them for currency issuance, they can increase that denomination up or down. And then that filters into the market and the interest rates to get financing for anything, primarily the housing market. So that's the biggest indicator. When people are talking about interest rate changes, people are really fixated on what the Federal Reserve is doing to raise or lower interest rates, which trickle down to essentially consumer lending when they want to go to a bank or a financier for a purchase of a home. The other lever that they can do is essentially bond issuance and contraction. And it's essentially creating a bond and a note for the Federal Reserve to hold a asset. And what that ends up doing is it creates a currency value that goes onto the bank lendings issuance that they can now lend out and distribute. So the Federal Reserve creates the liability and the currency issuance on 2 different kind of channel flows. And so that essentially that lever introduces new currency into the economy it's connected to. And so they can essentially create the bonds or absolve the bonds, which raises and lowers the currency denominations of the liabilities and the debt issuance within the economy. So that's my understanding of all those. So the one that handles full global financing, I'm leaning towards the World Bank, but I'm also skeptical. My second best guess would be the IMF as well. Yeah, I can pause.
Can we see if this can fit in the trunk as is?
Yeah.
Because look.
You don't want to redecorate it?
No, that was a lot of work. Looks cool, doesn't it? I did good. Just try.
Worst to worst is a no. All right, let me pause it.
I feel like I'm like, just try.
Just do it. Okay. I am coming. All right, guys, I'm going to close out the day right there. I got a little bit extra work I got to do, but thanks for hanging out and studying with me.